by John the Baptist. And it's the time in the Bible where we see the Holy Trinity incarnate, right? We see Jesus getting baptized, we see the dove come down, and Jesus says, "This is my son in whom I'm well," or God the Father says, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased," right? So we look at that big event, and immediately is followed by temptation, by struggles, by difficulties, which, as we know, is the walk that our paths take time and time again, right? We're in these spiritual moments of high, we're at the mountaintop where we feel like we're on top of the world, and then immediately we get hit with something and knocked back down a peg or two. Following this event, though, Jesus steps into his ministry proper. And a lot of the stuff that we see when we quote the scriptures and the messages that Jesus gives, a lot of the letters in red, if you want to put it that way, come after these events. So we're going to talk about the Beatitudes, which is Matthew chapter 5. And I feel like it's something that as Christians, we don't talk about enough, right? There's a quote that I'll share later where Christians love to share all sorts of things, right? We love to share the 10 Commandments. We love to share all these other stories, but we don't talk about the Beatitudes as often as I think we should. So let's go ahead and read them and we'll get rolling here. Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12 says this, and I'm going to break Matthew chapter 5 up. There's so much here that I think trying to roll through all of chapter 5 in one day would be an injustice to what Jesus gives us through this sermon. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went on the mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. These are the Beatitudes. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." It's the sort of phrasing that says, or blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the impoverished in spirit, right? And it's hard to read that and get a grasp of what we mean. Obviously, when we talk about being physically poor, it's not having money, not having resources, etc. So what does it mean to be spiritually poor? What does it mean to be impoverished spiritually? And it's simply understanding that you lack the ability to be a spiritual person connected with the gospel message on your own, right? People have this assumption that by good deeds, by these different practices, by any sort of sacrament, that you can become more spiritual, but we're not. We're not inherently people who can connect with Jesus without his divine intervention, right? If Jesus didn't offer us the possibility of communicating with him, if we didn't have the veil that was torn, we would have no way of reaching him outside of these appointed people that he said, hey, here's the priest that you would go to offer your sacrifices. It's that tearing of the veil. It's that conversation that we're invited to enter into with him, in that relationship that allows us to be full of the Spirit, right? Without it, we're not. It says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." We don't have the riches of the Spirit. We don't have riches stored up in heaven of our own volition. It's nothing that we've done, right? It's the gift of Jesus Christ that is offered to us. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." That doesn't mean walk around sad all the time. That doesn't mean mourning in the sense that the world talks about mourning. It's that brokenness that we find ourselves before God. It means mourning with our brothers and sisters who suffer, right? And mourning isn't about spending all day crying or poor me, poor them, poor whatever. It's about feeling the things that people feel. It's about understanding the suffering of the world and being broken before it. It's about looking at the gift that you weren't deserving of and understanding that there's nothing you could have done to earn this. And in that spirit, mourn for the things that you've done that have separated you from Jesus Christ. Sometimes people read this and they think, am I supposed to walk around sad all day? No, but mourn with those that mourn, for you're blessed in that. And you find comfort in that, in the person of Jesus Christ, in your brothers and sisters of faith. There's a celebration that happens whenever you get through that period of mourning and find a period of strength. And then you, with that person who you were mourning with, once things resolve, once things get better in your life, you bring it on to the next person and you mourn with them and you carry them through their difficult times. I talk about this every sermon, and the reason I do this is on purpose. I think a lot of the gospel message is about that fellowship that we have, not only with Jesus Christ, but with our brothers and sisters of faith. Ultimately, if you read the Bible, it's a lot about relationships. We'll talk about it later, but in John it says, a new commandment I give to you, love one another as I have loved you, right? It's first about loving like Jesus loves, but also loving one another. In that spirit of mourning, we find meekness. It says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Meekness is not weakness. We've talked about this in the past, and I know Scott has brought it up several times. Meekness is not rolling over, being a carpet to walk on. It's not about being somebody that can be pushed around. It's about finding humility and humbleness, right? Jesus wasn't somebody who could be walked over. Jesus was never weak. He was always a strong person, but he was still a meek and humble person. He knew his place, and because he knew his place, because he knew his inheritance as the Son of God, he didn't have to prove himself. That's the whole point of the temptations. He said, who are you to tell me who I am? I know who I am. Likewise, as Christians, we have to understand who we are as co-inheritors of the kingdom, as adopted children into the family of God. It's nothing that we've earned, right? And that's where the mourning and the poor in spirit talks about, but it's still an understanding of our place, that we have that power. So why would we need to flex it? Why would we need to prove to the world anything? Be meek, for yours is the earth. It says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Jesus is just coming out of a time of fasting. He just wandered the desert for 40 days and 40 nights without food or water. He understands thirst. He understands hunger. And in that spirit, he says, none of these physical things that you desire are a blessing in of itself. It's all about hungering and thirsting first for righteousness. I want to pause right here for a moment and before I continue with the rest of the Beatitudes. At this point, right, the people who had gathered together to hear Jesus must have been absolutely flabbergasted. They followed this man believing that he was going to be a certain way, that he was going to act a certain way, and that he was going to do certain things, right? They were waiting for a political leader. They were waiting for a military leader. They were waiting for all these things that Jesus wasn't. Jesus was a leader, and yes, he did free them from oppression, but not the physical oppression that they thought. So to hear this message given by Jesus, who's supposed to be the Messiah, would have absolutely floored them. This isn't what they expected. If we go back for a second, right? He says, blessed are the poor blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That would have been absolutely radical to hear at the time that this was spoken, because what the people listening were expecting is, blessed are the sons of Abraham, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, right? Blessed are God's chosen people, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They were focused so much on these rules and legality of who could and couldn't inherit the kingdom, who Jesus came for to die, who Jesus came to die for, and who he didn't, right? They wanted him to draw a line in the sand and say, these are my people. I'm going to lead them to salvation through physical means, and that's the end of it. And what does he say here? He says, I don't care about your rigmarole. I don't care about your man-made religion. I care about where your heart's at. I care about whether you understand these things of the Spirit. I'm not here to tear down any sort of physical wall. I'm not here to overthrow armies or kingdoms. I'm here to throw oppression in the hearts and minds of my people. I want it gone. And so this whole thing that we often use as like cross-stitch patterns or something flowery to say on a Sunday, I don't think we understand the weight of what Jesus is actually giving to us here. It's a playbook, right? Anyone who watches sports knows that the most important part of any play begins before the ball is ever snapped in football, before there's ever a tip-off in basketball. It's setting up these plays so that you actually know what the heck you're doing out there, right? And if everybody's not on the same page, if you don't know what to do, you end up running around in circles, absolutely lost. Just a side note, I used to teach Pee Wee football with my dad, and I think they were like first or second graders, right? And if you've ever watched those games, it is absolute chaos. It's insane to watch because you give the kids the ball and often they're running the wrong way or they're tackling the buddy who's on the same team, and it's wild. It's that lack of a playbook. They don't understand what the goal is. They don't understand how to get from point A to point B, and they don't understand how to work alongside their teammates. The people who are listening to this sermon had no idea what they were in for. They didn't know the playbook. They didn't even know what game they were supposed to be playing. It was chaos and it was wild and it was horrible. And Jesus comes to them and he says, no, 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 no. You're focused on all the wrong things. What I need you to be focused on right now is how you are in the spirit, how your heart is. Are you contrite? Are you patient? Are you there for one another? Do you mourn with your brothers who mourn? Are you so worried about overthrowing these political ideologies, overthrowing all these other things that you've begun to miss the people suffering around you? That's why this isn't just a cross-stitch pattern. This isn't just something nice to paint on the wall of the church. These aren't useless platitudes. This is our playbook. This is what the gospel message is about. This is the Sermon on the Mount. This is what we need to hear to get through this. I'll continue. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Jesus understood this. He was hungry. He was thirsty at this point. He had suffered so much and got to the place where he was. And he said, you know what? None of that compares to being one who hungers and thirsts for righteousness first and foremost. He kicks into this with blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. The Israelite people, the Jewish kingdom wasn't ready for this. They didn't want mercy. They wanted strength. They wanted Jesus to come in and overthrow the people who had overtaken them. They wanted liberation at the end of a sword. They didn't want mercy. They weren't here for mercy. He continues with, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. I like to think of the prisoner that was on the cross next to Jesus. You know, he asks him, are you who you say you are? And they have the conversation. And he says, I will see you today in paradise. What a marvelous concept. And we overlook it so often because we talk about how people live their lives and etc. But at the end of your days, you want to be as pure of heart as possible so you can see God. Getting off track for just a quick moment. There is this idea that, and I'm not going to go into it too much, but hell is a horrible place, right? But let's talk first and foremost about how hard it must be to live in a perpetual hell now here on earth, disconnected from God, right? My life is infinitely harder if I turn my back on God, not because my circumstances are more difficult, right? Our physical circumstances really don't change as much as we ought, or as much or as often as we want them to. But having God on my side, having brothers and sisters of faith on my side, this is the thing that I'm looking for, to be pure in heart so that I would see God here on earth and again in heaven, that I would have a relationship with him here and now because of my pureness of heart. And again, not something that I can do on my own. There is no way with all the spirituality in the world that me, Jarrett Curtis, could ever be pure in heart. It's impossible, except by the grace of God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Ultimately, we're called to push for peace, whether that's in your personal life with the friendships, the relationships around you, whether it's extending peace to people who are in the midst of strife, right? Ultimately, it's about peace. Now, this doesn't mean being weak. Again, we talked about meekness. It's about, first and foremost, trying to not feed into a conflict, but to fight that conflict. My dad gave me some great advice when I was first getting married. He said, never, ever, ever, ever should you fight with your wife. And I said, that's, the pot calling the kettle black, because, you and mom have arguments all the time. And he said, no, you're misunderstanding. He said, when I'm fighting, it's me and your mom versus the problem. I'm not fighting her. I'm fighting the issue that stands between us. This is what this is talking about. As peacemakers, we're not here to fight people around us. We're here to fight problems, to fix the hearts and minds of the people around us, and to fix our own hearts and minds so that we are people who desire peace. I want it to be us, the Blue Church of Poplar, Montana, versus every issue in this world. As peacemakers, we're here to fight, but not to fight people, but to fight principalities and rulers of darkness of this age. That's what we're here for. And in doing so, we are called the children of God. My boys have been, they discovered YouTube, obviously, and whenever they get the remote, they always turn on the same 4 or 5 songs, right? But the first song that they always ask us to put on is The one that goes, they will know we are Christians by our love, by our love. My sons know that Christians are people who love. We need to show that to the rest of the world. Right now, people are asking, how come Christians don't always look like Christ? But we do, right? Those of us that follow the gospel message, we are peacemakers. We are people of love. It's time to show the world that we are Christians by our love. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's not that you might be persecuted. It's not that you seek persecution, right? Because it's going to happen anyways. It's that in the midst of your persecution, because you are righteous, you inherit the kingdom of heaven. Righteousness draws conflict, right? The world doesn't want to see righteousness in the hearts and minds of the people. And by doing that, by preaching the messages that we're preaching, by sharing the love of Christ with the people around us, it naturally draws conflict. And as peacemakers, we need to understand that through that persecution, we're forged in fire, so to speak. I talked about those practices of wood burning, right? Where they burn off the outside of the wood, then they clean it off, and then they seal it in. And because of that burnt nature, it's able to retain its structure for longer, weatherproofs itself. That's what happens to us through our persecution. We become more and more righteous because we're tested in the fire. Nobody who is tested through the fire time and time again does so for selfish reasons. If you are continually beat up against, one of two things happen. Either you prove your strength or you break, right? A dam that's half built and isn't ready to retain the wall of water won't stand against it. But as time beats and weathers against that, it stands strong because it knows what it is. It's a wall. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. I talked about Paul when he was in Lystra and Derbe. I believe this is in Romans. I can't remember exactly the verse that it's at, right? So Paul's in Lystra, and he's trying to preach the gospel. And he sends his buddies ahead to go prepare to the next town. And as they're going up ahead, the people start picking up stones because of the message that he's sharing, and they beat him to death and they drag him to the edge of town. And Paul drags his unconscious body all the way across the desert to the next town. Again, he was so beat up, so swollen, bruised, and cut that these people left out there because they thought he had already died. It wasn't, they wanted to teach him a lesson and then send him on his way. No, they fully believed him to be dead. And in the midst of all that, right, Paul drags himself across this desert to the next town. He rests for exactly a day, right? The Bible describes it. They say he rested for a day and then he returned. And he went back and he shared the gospel message. That's powerful stuff. I don't know if I could do that right now. If the people of Poplar, Montana were to carry me out on a stick and throw rocks at me, I might think tomorrow about moving. I'm being realistic, right? Because that's a hard thing to go through. And yet in the same day, he drug himself all the way to the other town, got cleaned up, and then went right back to work. That's the kind of persecution that we need to be prepared for. And in doing that, we need to celebrate, because it means that we're inheriting the kingdom of heaven, right? That it's not our words that are spoken. And sure, our bodies may be broken and beaten, but our spirit's not broken, because we have the Holy Spirit with us, who strengthens and renews our faith daily. The Beatitudes, again, it feels like, when you see the Beatitudes, it's often like painted on a tapestry on a wall. We don't talk about it enough. There's a serious weight to these words that he's given to us. So I have this loop here. As I was reading this, I began to make connections from one point to another, right? This is a natural cycle that we kind of follow, right? So let me start at the top here. Poor in spirit. If you're poor in spirit or impoverished, if you understand that of yourself, you're lacking all these qualities that make you like Christ, it naturally leads to mourning. You look at your own fallen nature, you look at your own shortcomings, and you say, I am not deserving of any of this. I don't deserve the kingdom of heaven. I don't deserve to be a co-inheritor with Christ. So I look at that and I mourn my fallenness. I say, I'm broken before you, Lord. I didn't understand how much I had turned my back on you. I didn't understand how poor I was in the spirit. Thank you for the gift that you've given me. Through that mourning, we become humble. We become meek. We understand our place in life, that it's not by our own volition. It's not anything that we did to deserve this. And so we find ourselves in a place of humble positioning. We're prostrate before God, understanding that it's his power, not ours, right? We find that meekness. As we're there in that meekness, we begin to hunger and thirst more and more for righteousness, right? It naturally draws the line from A to B. Meekness leads us to hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Hungering and thirsting for righteousness makes us a merciful people, because we understand that we didn't deserve this gift. And so because we don't deserve this gift, it's not our mercy to give, it's Jesus's. And if he extended that mercy to us, we need to extend it to our brothers and sisters as well. That's why it says in John, love one another as I have loved you, right? Jesus was merciful. He didn't deserve any of this. We deserve death, and yet he pardoned us. So we, loving like Jesus loves, extend that mercy. From that mercy, we find ourselves pure of heart, right? We've prostrated ourselves before the Lord, said, I'm not deserving of your mercy, but I thank you for the gift that you've given me. I'm going to now extend that mercy to the people around me, and we become more and more like Jesus, pure in heart. Because we're pure in heart, we become peacemakers, right? You can't naturally be pure in heart and want conflict. You can't desire evil. You can't desire warfare. You can't desire fallenness or brokenness. You desire peace. You desire to fix the problems of the world, right? And in doing so, you become a peacemaker. And I forgot one, but being a peacemaker naturally leads to persecution. It's inevitable. The world doesn't want peace. The world wants chaos. Satan doesn't want peace. Satan wants chaos. So as you become a peacemaker, chaos ensues, persecution is followed. Through that persecution, we are understood, it is impressed upon us more and more and more through that persecution that we're poor in spirit. And then the cycle begins anew. And if you follow this cycle and you don't kick yourself out, you don't skip a beat, right? If you forget to mourn, you're not going to be meek. If you're not meek, you can't hunger and thirst for righteousness. If you don't hunger and thirst for righteousness, you can't be merciful. These things naturally follow a pattern. And that's why when they talk about the 10 Commandments, right? Everybody wants to talk about the 10 Commandments. Every single time that Jesus is alone with any group of people, they say, okay, now which one of the 10 Commandments is most important? Should we still follow the 10 Commandments? It's all about the legality and the rules and the politics of it. It's why man-made religion has such a difficult time looking like Jesus Christ, because sometimes we focus so much on the politics that we don't look at this cycle that Jesus gave us. Let's look at, the 10 Commandments say things like, don't murder, don't covet your neighbor's belongings. Well, if you're poor in spirit, if you're meek, if you mourn with those who mourn, if you hunger and thirst for righteousness, you're not going to kill somebody. If you're a peacemaker, you're not going to covet your neighbor's belongings. It's a heart issue before it is any sort of legality. That's why he says, a new commandment I give to you, love one another as I have loved you. You understand what Jesus' love looks like, and then you have to extend that to the people around you. And here's the playbook right here. It's the Beatitudes. This is a quote from Kurt Vonnegut. If you don't know who that is, he was a sci-fi writer who survived a prisoner of war camp in World War II. Brief backstory, right? Kurt Vonnegut was a prisoner of war in the slaughterhouse in World War II. And while he was a prisoner there, he saw these quote unquote Christian soldiers committing these horrific acts against these German soldiers, like unspeakable things. So Kurt Vonnegut later on in life says that he is a Christian atheist, which obviously doesn't make sense. But what he says is he believes in God, he believes the Christian message, but he has a hard time reconciling the fact that these Christians that he met don't look anything like Christ. All right, so take that with a grain of salt. He is still an atheist, but this was what he had to say about Christians and why he had such a conflict within himself about it. He says, for some reason, the most vocal Christians among us never mention the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5. But often, with tears in their eyes, they demand the 10 Commandments be posted on public buildings. And of course, that's Moses, not Jesus. I think he misunderstood here. I think he thought that Moses gave the 10 Commandments. I don't think he understood that God gave the 10 Commandments to Moses, but I digress. That's Moses, not Jesus, he says. I haven't heard one of them demand that the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes be posted anywhere. Blessed are the merciful, posted in a courtroom. Blessed are the peacemakers, posted in the Pentagon. Give me a break. It's an interesting concept, right? Again, take everything he says with a grain of salt, but at the end of the day, there's some wisdom to that. Why, as Christians, do we need to focus so much on the legality and the rigmarole and the different rules that Christians have to follow? When at the end of the day, the example is to be like Christ, right? Christ didn't come for politics. Christ didn't come for rules. Christ came for the hearts and the minds of the people around him. And in doing so, right, if your heart and mind is reflective of Jesus, naturally these other things will follow. And I'm not going to get political because I don't think that's the place for this, but I don't think we should be focused first and foremost on politics. I think we should let our faith inform our politics, not our politics inform our faith. I think that we, at the end of the day, need to try to look more like Jesus Christ. And the Beatitudes is that playbook. And in doing so, we reflect all these things around us. You can't be like Christ and not extend love in the way that Christ extended love. John chapter 3, verse 34. This is my favorite verse. If I could have like a verse that at the end of the day, I want to have my life reflect, it's this. This is the verse that I always come back to when I'm having a hard time. It says, a new commandment I give to you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. They will know we are Christians by our love. This is right before Jesus is about to go through all the stuff that he endured on the cross. He knows that this is coming, and he says, you guys, I have so little time with you left. It's coming to an end, and I just need you to understand one thing. You are so focused on these commandments. And at the end of the day, I want you to know that it's about loving like I love and about loving one another. The most important part of this is if we don't understand Jesus, and if we don't understand what his love looks like, then we cannot extend that love to one another. We can try to extend our version of love to one another, but if it's not reflective of Jesus, then we're not following the gospel message. I'm going to close with this, and then I'd actually like to discuss this for a little bit if you guys are okay with that. The big concept is this. Jesus gives us the guidebook. We aren't those little toddlers running around trying to play football and crashing into each other. We're not tackling the buddy next to us because we have a playbook right in front of us. We know what we have to do. Again, this is extended to the whole Bible, not just the Beatitudes, but the Beatitudes is a good place to start. Jesus gives us the guidebook on living a blessed life, following the spirit of the gospel message. Fun fact, I didn't know what Beatitudes meant before I looked the sermon up. I thought that was a name that was given to this specific section of the Bible. I didn't realize that it actually describes being blessed or this like sanctification process. So it's cool to see that that's reflected there. But we have the guidebook. We have the recipe for blessedness. And all we have to do is cook it up and try it. So that's my encouragement for this week. Be blessed. Be blessed through the actions that you take, through the way that you reflect on your experiences with one another. Find meekness, find patience, find poverty in the spirit. Find all these things that the Beatitudes show us that Jesus looks like. And in doing so, we'll bless one another and we'll find the blessings ourselves. Close this out here. All right. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Oh, I can't hear you yet, Lito. Sorry.
Can you please go back to that cycle?
Oh, sure. Hold on.